Welcome to the Pockets of Knowledge podcast. I'm your host, Desiree Stanley, here to share some amazing conversations. We're talking business, health, making and saving money, or starting something epic. Think of this as your go-to spot for stories that do a lot more than just kill time. They spark ideas, give you a boost, and perhaps even change the way you look at the world. I'm pulling in the experts, the thinkers, the doers, and the dreamers. We're about to dive into stories that open doors and ideas that light up your brain. Here we go. Welcome, everyone, to the Pockets of Knowledge podcast. I'm your host, Desiree Stanley, and with me today is Vivian Yip. How are you today, Vivian?
I'm doing so good, Desiree. Thanks for having me on your show.
Wonderful. Well, I am excited for our conversation today. Vivian, you are the founder and CEO of Hestia by Corporate Rentals USA, and you're going to tell us all about that and what that means. But I always love to ask my guests, what was this journey like for you? Like, where did you start and how did you get to where you are today as the founder of this company? And so take it away.
Ooh, this is my beginnings in entrepreneurship are from as early as I can remember. I was like 7 years old. I lived in Vancouver, Canada, and I had to put on cream on one hand, and then I was doing baby powder, and I was like, why is it so inefficient? And this is just like a kid, right? I was like, why is it so inefficient that people are using cream and baby powder? Why don't you just combine it into one? So then I combined and stirred this formula into one, and I packaged it up, and I tried to give it away. And I was like, at that moment, I was like, I should be inventing things because I'm brilliant. Long story short, I've always been an entrepreneur. I've just always thought of creative ways to be efficient and do things better. And I think my journey started with real estate investing, right? I learned a long time ago that being an employee, a W-2 employee, there's a lot of risk in there. There could be days where suddenly you get fired or you get laid off and suddenly you don't have an income stream anymore. So luckily I've never been fired, but I have been laid off a couple of times. Well, one time I was laid off, and that was back in 2008. And I said at that moment, and I was 26 or 27 at the time, I'm not going to let anybody control the amount of money that I make. I have to always have a secondary stream. And I decided to dive deeper into real estate investing a little bit later. And because it's so hard to cash flow, you could have a property that cash flows maybe $100 or $200 a month, and all of a sudden you have a roof problem or an HVAC problem, or when they move out, then you have to spend thousands of dollars to clean the property and paint it and whatnot. I was like, well, what if I just throw some furniture in it and host extended stays? Let's see what happens. And I will admit, I started as a short-term rental host, but when I started getting extended stay bookings, I realized I'd learned the secret to cash flowing on rental properties, and that's through a hospitality experience. So here I am with 9 properties, and I have a huge network of other amazing people that host these extended stays, and that's the birth of Corporate Rentals USA.
Oh, that's cool. Thank you for sharing that with us. And I love the story about your young years as, kind of an innovator and trying to create something that solves a problem that you felt at the time, right? And
Right.
you're still doing that. It sounds like solving the problem for yourself and for others who have rental properties and maybe need to have more cash flow generated from those. And so we'll dive into that a little bit more. But I want to ask you, because you did work for, kind of corporate, you were a six-figure employee. And so how did you decide the time was right to leave that and really launch this as a business?
Oh, that's a super good question. So I used to work at Apple. And when you talk about innovator, I've always been a problem solver. And even at Apple, I won awards for solving global problems for the company. And it was a great career until it wasn't anymore. But I knew, let's say back in 2017, my kids were young and I was coming home every single day, like driving in traffic, coming home, picking the kids up, cooking dinner, putting them to bed, cleaning the house. And every single day was the same grind over and over again. And I was like, this is not the life I want to live. How do I get out of this rat race? And remember reading Rich Dad Poor Dad in my 20s, and I thought, you know what? Let's pull that out of the archives. let's refresh what that life looks like. And I thought, you know what? I want to make money when I'm sleeping. How do I do that? And I thought that real estate would be a good way because a lot of wealthy people use real estate. And there were so many different ways that you could attack it. And I just figured out one way, which was flipping houses. So my husband and I started flipping houses while we were working full-time jobs, just so that we can do something different with our lives and shake up the everyday boringness. And turns out that we were pretty good at it. Right? So we were pretty good at it, and then by the time we were able to flip our 6th property, we had made enough money to have a down payment to keep this property, and that's the entrance into the Airbnb world. And then the moment that I realized that I needed to quit my job was when I was so stressed out. Yeah, it was during the pandemic. We're talking mid-2020. We're at the height of the pandemic. I'm in logistics at Apple and we're moving product across the world. And everybody hears about supply chain issues at a company like Apple is like next level. And every day after every Zoom call or every WebEx, my hair would fall out. And it just kept falling out and falling out. I would have a pile of hair on the floor at the end of every day. And by the time I looked in the mirror, I didn't recognize who I was anymore. So I realized not only did I look terrible on the outside, but I also felt terrible on the inside. And that's when I took a leave of absence just to figure out what I was going to do. Right? How do I replace my 6-figure income? I was making almost $200,000 a year. How do you replace that? How do I build enough cash flow and income so that I don't have to worry about going to work for somewhere that I'm so unhappy? And the signal was clear. Just look in the mirror and I knew that it was time to bet on myself.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that with us. And we talked a little bit before we started about your journey with alopecia and hair loss. And so it sounds like this kind of was where it initiated from was the stress levels, that were occurring during the pandemic. And, you were not alone in the level of stress that many people felt because of the pandemic, but it did alter the journey for you in your life. And we can absolutely touch on that because I'd love to hear your thoughts on it. But let's talk a little bit more deeply about you were flipping homes and then you were able to finally secure enough cash to hold on to a property. And so that property, I guess, was your first Airbnb, it sounds like.
Yes. Yeah. I already had another rental property, but it was a long-term rental. It still is a long-term rental. But I was really excited because I actually worked at a hotel when I was 17 or 18 years old and I loved hospitality. And so I can't afford a hotel at this point in my life, but I can afford a house. So how can I deliver the same kind of hospitality experience that I loved so much when I was doing my internship? Opening my Airbnb was my first step back into it.
That's cool. And I love that it gave you an opportunity to do something that excited you and brought you joy again. And
Totally.
yeah, and creating an experience for the customer who is going to be staying at your Airbnb. And so that is so cool. So tell us about that Airbnb experience and what eventually led you into having multiple properties, but then deciding to kind of veer into more of a longer term, but not full-time rental properties.
Yeah. So running short-term rentals was pretty fun, but I would say within 6 to 7 months, it was exhausting. You're constantly making sure that you're getting reservations, you're adjusting prices, you're chasing your cleaners, you're restocking your consumables, you're handling maintenance requests. And when your guests are in and out all the time, there's things that happen. And I'll admit that I wish I would have started maybe a little bit more efficient by using systems, by changing codes with systems, by scheduling cleaners with systems. That way it would have been less daunting. But the reason why I transitioned into extended stay was actually an accident. So for anybody that's in the Airbnb space as a host, if you've not been hosting since 2020, you don't know how much control Airbnb has over your business, or maybe you do. So during the pandemic, if you couldn't get on a flight or someone's quinceanera was canceled or graduation was canceled or a wedding was canceled, whatever it was, even though myself as a host, if I had a strict cancellation policy, Airbnb would say, yeah, no problem. Pandemic, we're going to cancel that reservation for you. No issues. But that would leave me as a host high and dry because now I'm relying on that revenue to pay for my mortgage. And I didn't like that feeling at all. Like, I don't like the feeling of not having control, especially when it comes to money. So I called a friend of mine who lives in San Diego, and he's a more experienced investor than I was. And I looked to him and I said, "I'm just curious, do you have any thoughts on what way I should go?" And he's saying, "Vivian, try corporate rentals, try extended stays." And I was thinking, like, how dumb am I? Because I have been relocated twice in my career, right? And both times I had to stay in temporary housing. And then he's at that time, it was travel nurses were all the rage. And he's like, "Yeah, just try it and see what happens. You know, your husband's a realtor, put it on MLS and then try Craigslist, try Furnish Finder, try all these different things." And I was like, "You know what? I have nothing to lose here. The worst that could happen at this moment is to have these reservations in my books and then have them canceled underneath me. I'd rather be in control of my business." So I snoozed my listing and I found other avenues to advertise my property. And then I got a family that moved from California. They stayed for 3 months in my property because they were building a house and they paid $3,800 a month when my rent, or sorry, when my mortgage was $1,600 a month. And then after they left, I started panicking like, "Oh my gosh, who am I gonna rent it to?" And then I got a match on MLS for a construction team, and they negotiated the price because construction budgets are a little bit lower, and they paid me $3,200 a month, and they stayed for 7 months. So here I am in the hospitality business, I'm cash flowing with a lot less work.
Yeah. Yeah, that's
And
excellent.
yeah,
Go ahead.
and then that after that, I was like, "Okay, I'm going all in." I sold that property and I bought more.
Oh my gosh, that's awesome. It really sounds like you you hit on the right thing at the right time. It was like having that connection with your friend in San Diego that just was like, "Hey, what about this idea?" And you're like, "Yes," like the light bulb just went off big time.
Yep.
And how fantastic to be able to rent it for like double, more than double what your mortgage payment is, and talk about cash flow generation because of that. That's amazing.
Yep.
Thank you for sharing that story with us and how that kind of really opened it up for you, it sounds like.
Absolutely, because nobody else was really doing these extended stays, but it made so much sense. And then I took this $5,000 course that taught me about insurance housing.
Mm.
If I don't know if you're familiar with it. Do you live in a single family home?
Yes.
Okay, so imagine, don't imagine, but if it happens, your house burns down or there's a major water damage issue, and you and how many kids do you have?
My kids are, we're empty nesters now.
Okay. So imagine you and your 3 kids, and they're still young, and you get put into a hotel for 9 months. How would you feel about that?
Yeah. It doesn't feel good.
Doesn't feel good. You want
No.
to have a space to have family movie nights. You wanna have dinner together. You wanna have a space to entertain with friends and hang out and just feel home again without being in a s like a hotel situation. And so when I learned about the insurance strategy of providing temporary housing to people that have been displaced from their homes, I was like, "That's it. That's it." Because like, I get to provide the highest level hospitality, and I get to provide clean, beautiful spaces, and I get to cash flow at the end of the day. So it aligned with everything that I'm so passionate about, which is real estate investing, cash flow, and hospitality all in the same place.
Yeah, that's amazing because you're also, yes, the hospitality, but you're also providing a much needed service for a family. And like you said, when you have little kids, you don't want to be living in a hotel. It's just,
Right.
there's so much there that's, it's just incredibly uncomfortable. Even, if you had older kids, which could actually be a whole separate issue because there's no privacy at all. But
Right.
yeah, but you're offering a, clean space that people can feel almost kind of normal,
Right.
given this situation that may, have been very traumatic.
Yep.
Here's something that's very stable and comfortable for a family while their home's being built. So that's amazing. And I want to just ask you real quick because you have kind of spun this not just for yourself, but you're also helping other people learn how to take their properties and do this same system. And so, do you
Correct.
want to share a little bit for the listeners who may be considering what do I do with my rental properties?
Sure. So at the end of the day, I'm a realtor as well. And are you a realtor?
I am.
Okay. So you don't refer out to business to people that you don't trust. Okay. So this is a really important part of the business model is that if I, so we cannot, well, number one, we can't predict when someone's going to have a flood or fire. It just happens and nobody knows when it's going to happen, where it's going to happen. I can't put a property in one place and say, let's just get insurance bookings. That's not how it works. Because I might be booked or I just have to have a network of other people. But I want to build a network of people that I like, know, and trust. I'm not going to refer business to someone that has a crappy property that's, slumlord style person that has crappy furniture or doesn't take care of their homes. So the idea behind Hestia, which is the Greek goddess of hospitality, hearth, and home, was that I would build a certification program. And this certification program means that we accept hosts that have at least 1 year of experience because a lot can happen in a year,
Mm.
right? Things break, things need maintenance. It's a house at the end of the day. Secondly, we want a beautifully furnished house with the right amenities. I can't tell you how many times I've walked into someone's so-called Airbnb, even if it does have superhost status, but in the kitchen, for instance, you can't even find a pizza cutter. Actually, in fact, a month ago, we did an inspection on a property, and this particular home, even though he had been running furnished rentals for a couple years already, I opened up his cabinets and he had 4 cups and 2 mugs and a cookware set. And that's it. I know for me, if I'm gonna stay somewhere, and I've stayed at corporate rentals before, there's gonna be vegetable peelers and can openers and simple things like that that you would expect that someone would have at an Airbnb, but they don't have that. So, in addition to the experience, we want an amenities list that's standard for all of our properties. And the final icing on the cake is we send an inspector to inspect the home for 4 hours before they're allowed into our program officially. So that 4-hour inspection entails things like making sure the washer and dryer works, that the heat heats and the air cools, that the garbage disposal works, right? Can you imagine if you've just lost your home? Maybe you've lost a pet or even a spouse or a loved one, and you end up in a so-called Airbnb or some kind of temporary housing for someone that you don't know who's providing the housing. You can't access the garage. The dishwasher doesn't work. The light bulbs aren't changed. It's super dirty. That's the kind of experience we don't want. And that's the idea behind Hestia.
Oh, that's amazing. It sounds like an incredible service that you are offering to people to help elevate their properties if they're
Yep.
going to be included in the program. And you're right. When I've stayed at Airbnbs at other places and I know things happen. I know they sprout legs and they walk off
Yep.
because we've spoken to owners and it's like, well, there was a knife, there was, whatever set of the thing that was missing. And I'm sorry it's not there now, but that doesn't help you when you're staying there. And what a terrible situation to be in. Like you said, if you've lost somebody and your home, which, is very personal, and to be in a position now where it's just like, I don't need this on top of it. Like,
Yeah.
I don't need this, thing that's dishwasher that's not working, or I can't get into the garage or whatever on top of everything else. It's
Yeah.
no good.
The unfortunate reality of what happens in this situation is like, for me, it might not be a big deal because I've been flipping houses, right? But a lot of people that go through these scenarios where their entire lower levels damaged and they got to tear it out. Not only are they taking care of their family, going to work, and taking care of everything else, but now they're suddenly general contractors. Now they gotta handle the contractors, they gotta handle the permits, they gotta make sure everything's on schedule. Like, all of a sudden, they're put into this space that they're completely unfamiliar with under a timeline. So, why can't we just, as hosts, demonstrate our ability to provide hospitality so that our guests can think about just getting their lives back on track? That's our real goal, and I only work with people that have a focus on hospitality.
Oh, yeah. That's excellent. Wow. Thank you for sharing that with us. And I had a guest on who is an attorney, and we talked thoroughly about insurance and in relation to when your insurance company isn't paying for, like you just described, the whole first level of a house is water damaged or whatever. And that is like an entirely different problem, right? So not only are you trying to work with contractors, but you're also trying to battle with your insurance company.
Yeah.
And so it's like the last straw. It just broke the camel's back. And, it sounds to me like you're really doing everything in your power to make it one less thing that they have to worry about.
Right, and I also try to make it one less thing that our real estate investors have to worry about. Most of our investors that provide the homes in our network, they're 500,000 to $1 million homes.
Mm.
So that tells me they're not dummies, they're lawyers, they're doctors, they're business people, right? They have investment properties that are high quality. So if I can offer them a service of providing proposals for them, scheduling the walkthroughs, because a lot of these insurance guests will wanna tour the properties. Basically, we're an extension of the investor's business because we collect all the information in advance. Our system is able to like, if I get a request for insurance housing, it could be Gainesville, Texas, or somewhere else. My system will automatically match the properties in my system, and we can send out a proposal in, like, a 2-minute process. So you, as the investor, maybe you're sipping cocktails in Antigua somewhere, and you don't want to drop everything to go to your hotel room to go and drop this proposal. Well, you've given us all the information. We do that for you. Go enjoy that cocktail and have another one.
Mm, yeah, that's fantastic. Vivian, wow, good stuff. So
I'm
let's talk.
innovating.
Yeah, it is, right? It's just another way that you have revamped an entire system. It sounds like so. That's fantastic. Bravo.
Thank
Let's
you.
let's talk a little bit more about you being in real estate. And I know that you are involved in a group called Invest Her. And
Yeah.
so share with us what that is and what it is that you do and the information that you share through that.
So I come from a long line of women in male dominated industries. My mother included. She was a banker as a female Asian person in Canada in the 80s. So I've always been drawn, I think, naturally to male dominated industries. So having worked in tech, there's a lot of tech bros. And then, of course, in real estate, there's a lot of real estate bros, right? The bros don't stop. And when I found InvestHer, which is a global real estate investing group for women, it just aligned with a lot of my own values. And I thought I would love to be the leader in Austin. So I lead the women's group. There's over 1,000 people in our network. And we have monthly meetups. About 30 to 40 people show up every month. And we have guest speakers. It's free. People show up for free. We have guest speakers. You can learn about how to make cash offers, how to flip homes, how to find your first deal. Maybe you need a private money lender. Maybe you need someone that has experience with permits or ground up construction. So, whatever it is, it's a really safe space for women to network. And women, historically and statistically, are better investors than men. So, having a safe space to talk about real estate and walk construction sites and whatnot without being mansplained. That's
Mm.
a really nice approach to real estate.
Oh, yeah, for sure. And so this group, there's investor groups that meet up all over the United States, or is it just in Austin?
It's global.
Oh,
Invest
global.
Her is there's 60 meetups around the world, including Canada and the US, and I can't remember where all the other places are, but and every year they have Invest Her Con. So this year it was in Austin. Next year is going to be in the Orlando market, and it's phenomenal. We get to be in the company of other women and talk about women, not issues, but women like opportunities for women in general around the world. We talked about how 15% of the women in this world do not have their own bank accounts, right? We talked about women's rights and how we can help collectively for women's issues. And these are not things you'll ever hear about at other conferences like Bigger Pockets or Limitless, whatever. So it was really great to hear keynote speakers talking about women and investing and hear what other people are doing.
Yeah, that's excellent. And well, I'll include information for that group so that the listeners can check that out and see if perhaps there's something local to them that they can join, just maybe do a little bit more research on because it sounds amazing and, a tremendous opportunity for women to learn from other women in a, like you said, a safe space where you're not being talked down to or, having something explained, which you already understand. And we've all been there. So that's awesome. So I definitely will include that. And Vivian, you also have a YouTube channel that I would love for you to tell the listeners about so we can, check that out. And what would they discover there?
It's my little baby YouTube channel. It's Corporate Rentals USA, and they can learn how to move from a STR business, short-term rental business, into midterm rentals. They can learn about, what renter's insurance looks like. I have so many topics. Today, we had a webinar talking about how you can make money on your vacation rental or midterm rental through EV charging, right? So there's a technology out there that you can add to your property for 500-600 bucks, and that becomes an EV charging station at your home, and you can have your guests stay there. Can you imagine if you had to stay somewhere for 90 days and you drive an EV vehicle and there wasn't a way for you to charge? Like, these are like, I love looking at ways to change the game in business, because we already know short-term rental saturation's out there,
Mhm.
and the STR people are starting to come around to MTR. So what are the MTR operators going to do to ensure that they're not in a saturated market? And to me, that's 2 strategies. It's 1, it's gonna be brand strategy, and 2, it's gonna be amenities. And given that the adoption of EV vehicles increases every single year, I think it's a great, great thing to have.
Yeah, it's just another way to differentiate yourself and stand out from all the other, properties that are available. It just makes you that much more appealing
Yeah.
for
So
sure.
they can learn about that, lots of different topics on my Corporate Rentals USA page, and join my Facebook group. It's called Midterm Rental Wealth with Vivian Yip, and join it.
Yeah, cool.
Lots
I'll
of
include
exciting.
that. Yeah, absolutely. And I'll include that information in the show notes for the listeners to find easily because yeah, I want, people to have an opportunity to learn and build their own family's wealth, right? And we know real estate has been a way to change generations of families and to have an opportunity to own a property, it changes families' lives
Yeah.
completely, in my opinion. And I think it's fact. But would you agree?
Oh, it's fact for sure.
Yeah. Well, so then I mentioned before, as you had shared the story about the stress of your time working at Apple and during the pandemic and, beginning to lose your hair. So if you would like to share with us a little bit more about what was happening and, the alopecia and hair loss and perhaps maybe how it has impacted your life and what you would like the listeners to know more about it. And if perhaps there's any new and interesting like treatments that could give listeners hope.
Sure. First of all, I wanna say that even though I don't wear a wig today and I'm very comfortable being bald, it wasn't always this way. Losing my hair, all of it, in a matter of about 8 weeks was extremely traumatic for me. I would say that the first thing I had to do was realize that I'm not just myself. I'm a mother, I'm a wife, and I am a role model to my children. And how was I gonna wake up every day and treat my life? And I decided that looking in the mirror wasn't giving me the happy vibes. So I stopped looking in the mirror. And then I just put on a hat and I studied real estate, because I knew that real estate was gonna be the way that I could quit my job. So I just put my head down and I looked at real estate instead, stopped looking in the mirror, didn't do any webinars like I do today, and found joy in achieving things. I'm a high achiever kind of person. I'm not sure if you are, but I like getting stuff done, and I it really excited me to acquire properties under market value, renovating them, putting furniture. Those were all things that gave me the good vibes. And so I stuck to doing things that gave me good vibes, whether it's exercise or going out to eat or even having some drinks or hanging out with my close friends. So I stayed with things that made me happy. Number 2, I came to realize that I had to just look on the brighter side of things. On my darkest days, instead of trying to cry, I would try to figure out, like, how much time am I saving if I don't have hair? So I actually did the math. So the math is like, if you have 365 days, of which 80% of the time you wash your hair, because nobody washes their hair every single day, and then you calculate that you take 40 minutes every time to wash, dry, and style, and then go to the salon and spend money. I calculated that I actually get 12 days of my life back. So you guys have 365 days. I have 377. And then that became a way for me to say, I do have time. It used to be I don't have time for that. Now I'm like, well, I have an extra 12 days now. I do have time. So stop making excuses. And then finally, I have looked into different kinds of drugs and treatments that are out there. There's a couple of JAKs inhibitors, they're called. I've never tried them because I belong on a Facebook group for alopecia support. And at the end of the day, to me, my health is really, I'm very healthy. There's nothing wrong with me. My blood pressure is great. My cholesterol is great. I'm a little bit overweight, but that's because I like to eat. But who doesn't like to eat? And I realized that if I try to take this medicine, it helps my hair grow back. But if I stop taking it and then my hair falls out again, what good does that do me? They're prescription drugs designed for rheumatoid arthritis. Why would I put my body through that? I've come to just learn to embrace what I have. I got my eyebrows done so that I don't look so strange. I got my eyelids tattooed, so I wake up looking more refreshed every day, and I wear fake lashes. I just flaunt what I got, and I don't worry about growing my hair back. It's just actually, it takes up too much of my time. I don't want it back now.
Yeah. And I can completely understand that because I have said to my husband, the amount of time that I spend doing my hair every day is ridiculous. And, not that necessarily am looking for, this route, but that, to have more time is something that we do all want to have. And to be able to spend our time on things that we feel are more important is really, all of us would like to do. So bravo for that and for your amazing attitude and your mindset and the way that you have, thought about this and found a way to focus on what makes you happy, what brings you joy, and, choosing a path that works for you to make you the happiest that you can be.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's
It's been
awesome.
a journey, but I think mindset
Yeah.
is absolutely the most important thing.
Yeah. Yeah. 100%. You're right. Well, let's maybe talk about some misconceptions that people have about alopecia and what it is.
Alopecia is an autoimmune disorder. It means that my body is protecting me. My body's hyper immune and protecting me against I rarely ever get sick, and it's forcing my hair to fall out. The unfortunate truth about autoimmune is that sometimes, most of the time, people have a secondary disease that comes from it. I haven't discovered what my secondary one is, so right now I only have one. Misconceptions, you're not dying. It's just hair. It's just your hair follicles being pushed out of your hair being pushed out of your follicles. And it's some people say it's genetic, but nobody in my family had it. Some people believe it's stress triggered and others don't. There are other people that will say that eating a clean diet will help you. I will say that I did try the clean diet and I did try the, what do you call it? Acupuncture, but I couldn't have coffee. I couldn't have sugar. I couldn't have meat. I couldn't have any kind of caffeine. I couldn't do hard exercise. I was like, do I want to live anymore if I do that? So I was like, forget it. I did it for like 3 months. I think I saw some baby hairs come up and maybe it works, but I wasn't patient enough to find out because at the end of the day, I love food more than my hair.
Who wants to give up their coffee? I certainly don't. So yeah, I could totally understand. You made a choice that was right for you. And that's I want to enjoy my food and my coffee and, whatever, and that's what matters to you. So
Yeah.
that's awesome. But thank you for sharing some of that detail with us because I know, like for myself, I didn't know all of the information around it. I have experienced some people in my life who have alopecia. And so it's not that I'm unfamiliar with it. I just didn't know exactly what causes it. And so thank you for sharing that with us.
You're welcome.
Well, Vivian, I always love to ask my guests if there are books that they have read or like to, or maybe reading right now, or podcasts that they're listening to that would be helpful or beneficial to the listeners. Do you have some that you'd like to suggest for us?
One of my personal favorites that I read last year, and I try to recommend this to everyone in the hospitality business, is a book called Unreasonable Hospitality. Have you heard of
Mm.
it?
No.
It's by the author by the general manager of 11 Madison Park, the former restaurant, the number 1 restaurant in the world, right? So it's the story of this guy who was leading this restaurant, and the first chapter is how they were at the world's best restaurant competition, and their restaurant was named number 50, and they were devastated. I mean, think of the number of restaurants in the world, and they were number 50, and they were devastated. So it then embarks on a journey of what they do to become number 1, and they stayed number 1 for, like, over a decade. So I love this book because it's a story of resilience and creativity and innovation, and I would love to see myself as the number 1 company one day with Corporate Rentals USA to provide amazing temporary housing for people that are in need. So
Oh
I love
gosh.
that book.
Yeah, fantastic. And so do you listen to podcasts?
I do. I do. I skip around. I love all kinds of podcasts. I might go into the really granola stuff sometimes, and then I'll do breathing ones, somatic breathing, or sometimes even a sound bath, but then I'll listen to all real estate podcasts. I love listening to Landlord Diaries, right? That one's a very common one amongst the midterm rental investors. And basically bigger pockets, learning about how to invest out of state. Because I live in Austin, it's still pretty expensive here, right? So I would like to get the courage to invest outside my market.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you for sharing those. And is there any specific, besides bigger pockets, and I can link that, is there any other specific ones that you would like to suggest that I include in the show notes?
Just subscribe to my YouTube channel. Enjoy
Yeah,
my Facebook group. Selfishly, that's what I want.
for sure. Well, I will include that information absolutely so that the listeners can find you because I agree. I think that people need to have access to places and opportunities that they can learn more. And so you are providing that. And I absolutely want the list. But before we close out, is there anything else that you want the listeners that maybe you haven't shared yet, that you think that the listeners should know about real estate or midterm rentals or even the insurance, market side of it?
Sure. I have an introductory course on Udemy, udemy.com. And if you just look up my name, Vivian Yip, you'll find a course there on midterm rentals. It is super inexpensive. It's like 5 or 6 hours of content for maybe like $30, maybe cheaper, depending on what promotions they're doing at the moment. So if you want like a very good introduction into what midterm rentals are and how to get started, and you don't even have to own properties to get started. I talk about ways to start without properties, without owning furniture, and there's just if you want it bad enough, there's a way to do it.
Awesome. Well, I will include that information too. And so, lastly, Vivian, would you share with us how can the listeners find you? What's your website? What social pages can they find you on Instagram, LinkedIn?
Oh gosh, I'm like a social media beast. My website is vivianyip.com, and you can find me on Instagram at vivianyip_official. You can also find me on LinkedIn and Facebook and TikTok.
And of course, your YouTube. And so, I'll include
Yeah.
all of those details for the listeners. Thank you again, Vivian, for sharing this knowledge and information with us. It's just been wonderful to have you on. And I so appreciate your time. I know how busy you are. And so to share this information with us has been fantastic. Thank you.
The pleasure was mine.
Wonderful. Well, we'll talk more soon.
All right, thank you.
Thank you, dear listeners, for tuning in to another insightful episode of the Pockets of Knowledge podcast. We appreciate your time and curiosity as we explore fascinating topics together. If you enjoyed today's discussion, be sure to join us next week for another amazing episode. Remember, your journey of learning and growth is a continuous adventure, and we're thrilled to be part of it. Don't forget to subscribe so you never miss an episode. Until next week, stay curious and keep exploring those pockets of knowledge.